Okay, so I'm going to walk you through and show you how to adjust the chain on your Honda Grom. Super easy, just simple, basic stuff. But if you've never done it before, it might be a little intimidating. So let's just take a look. Here's what you want to remember. You want to adjust it to where when you're done, your chain has an 1 3/8 slack, which means 1 3/8 play. I'll show you that in just a second. You don't want it too tight. You don't want it too loose. If it's too loose, it could jump on your sprockets, excess wear. It could actually get worse than that. If you have it too tight, it'll be too much tension on your sprockets, and again, extra wear and loss of power. And when you're running a bike that only has 10 horsepower to begin with, you don't want to lose any power. So you don't want it too loose, you don't want it too tight, sweet spot in the middle. So let me show you something right off the bat. So the first thing you need to know is how to park your motorcycle. You don't park it in neutral. Whenever you pull up and you park every day, you turn the motorcycle off, you have it in first gear, you let the clutch out, and then you roll the motorcycle forward or back until it catches tension, and then you put your kickstand down and you set the bike down. When I say forward or back, depends if you parked on a hill slightly downhill or slightly uphill. If it's slightly pointed downhill, you roll the bike forward. If the bike could slide downhill, you roll it backwards. Now you bring the bike to where it stops, where it can't go anymore, and then you put your kickstand down. That holds it in place. That's kind of like your emergency brake in your car. If you were to leave it in neutral and the bike was slightly downhill and you put your kickstand down, it could roll. It could roll forward slowly and fall off the kickstand, and the bike could fall over. So out of habit, I got off the motorcycle right here. I had tension on the gear. I turned the bike off. I let the clutch out. I let the bike roll backwards a little bit. I put it on the kickstand. That way it can't roll backwards anymore. But let me show you what happens when you do that when you're trying to adjust your chain. Tools are pretty bare minimum. You can do it all with open-end wrenches and a tape measure. But what I'm using today is a socket for the axle nut instead of an open-end wrench, a couple of small open-end wrenches when I go to adjust the chain, an adjustable wrench for holding on the other side, a tape measure, so when I'm done, as I'm doing it, I can measure my chain, and a torque wrench. Now, if you don't have a torque wrench, I'll show you how to get by without it. You could really get by with a couple of adjustable wrenches and some pliers if that's all you had, but a set of open-end wrenches and a tape measure would make this job easier. Okay, so think about this. I stopped the motorcycle, I turned it off, I put it in first gear, I let the clutch out, and let the bike roll back until the engine caught. What that did was it created tension on the chain to help hold the bike in place. Well, now, if you didn't know that and you're going by your owner's manual that's supposed to have an 1 3/8 in your chain slack, you look at this and you say, well, if I bring it to the top of the tape measure, that comes down 1 3/8. I've got an 1 3/8 slack right there. I'm perfect. Well, the thing is, you're not perfect, because look at the top of the chain. The top of the chain's got all kinds of slack in it. So you don't have a true reading of how much slack is in the bottom of your chain like the owner's manual is telling you to look at. Now watch what happens when I put it in neutral. I put it in neutral, and now I've got a little bit of slack on the top like you're supposed to, and the bottom where you measure, I'm down here 2 inches, and I could touch on the top. So I've got over 2 inches of slack. Now pay attention to your chain slack. I've had this adjusted about 400, maybe 500 miles ago at max, and it's already out of adjustment. So let me show you what to do. So the last time I was on the bike and I needed to adjust the chain, I didn't have a torque wrench with me. I just had a couple open-end wrenches. So what I did is I took my axle nut and I marked it with a marker. You can see that little black mark right there, and then you can see I marked the swing arm. So I marked exactly where the nut was. I put my open-end wrench on here and I turned it about 3/4 of a turn. I went to my adjustments for my chain on each side. We'll do that in just a second. I adjusted it, got it perfect. Then I came back and I just tightened it back up to where I was back to my mark. When I got home a couple 100 miles later, I checked this and it was perfect. It was actually 44 pounds. It's just perfect what it calls for to be torqued down. So if you don't have a torque wrench, you need to adjust your chain, loosen it, but mark it before you do it, so when you torque it back down, you don't under or over torque it. First step, I've just got my open end wrench on this side, just a standard old adjustable wrench. You can use another wrench on this side or a socket. And as you hold this side in place, just loosen this side. What you're doing is you're putting the 12 on this one, and you're putting the 10 on this one. And so what you're doing with that is you're going to loosen the back nut. The back nut tightens to the front nut to hold it in place. That way it can't back off and loosen or change. Now that this nut is loose, this nut can move freely. I'm going to take my wrench, I'm going to put it on here, and I'm going to start tightening it. And as I tighten it, I'm going to watch now. I don't know if you could tell that in the camera or not, but as I just tightened it, I gained a little bit inside here. It's pulling the whole axle. As I tighten this, it's drawing the whole axle back. So it's pulling the whole wheel back. I'm now at the big mark. I'm now at the big mark, and then the little mark, and then just a little bit of gap in front of that. I'll go to the other side and make. Okay, so I've got my chain in adjustment. And the way I did that was I just tightened this nut about a half a turn. I checked my reveal to see what kind of gap I had between the notches. I have the big notch, the small notch, and then I had a little tiny gap. Went to the other side. I made it look just like that, and I came over here and checked my chain slack. Wasn't enough, so I came back and I turned this nut a little bit more, made this reveal a little bit bigger, went to the other side, did the same thing, measured my chain again. I did that 3 times before I got it perfect. So a little bit goes a long way. I was only turning this nut a quarter to a half a turn each time. You can see in the end, I've got the big line, a little line, and then I have that little gap left. If you come to the other side, I've got the same thing. I've got the big line, the little line, and then that same little gap left. Now you just measure that up with your eyes. You don't need to actually measure that with a tape measure. You can get it perfect just by looking at it. You should be able to anyway. So now that both sides are exactly the same, that means my wheel is in alignment in the back. And I come over here to my chain just to show you the end result. If I look at my chain here, the slack, I kind of move the tape measure up to make it easy. I'm sitting at, if you can tell on there, about 2 3/8, and then I can bring the chain up to the 1 inch mark. So if you were to measure that coming down, you come down half, 1 inch, 1 3/8. 1 3/8 total movement. Next step is to start wrapping it up, which is, I'm just gonna take this back nut, I'm gonna make it tight to help hold the other one in place, which means I'm gonna put my wrench on the front nut, that was my adjustment nut, to hold it in place, while I put my wrench on the back nut, and I'm gonna torque it down to help pull it into place to hold it tight. So I just tighten this one into this one without letting this one move. Hold this in place and just tighten this one into it until it can't move. Do the same thing on this side, and then torque your axle nut back down to either your mark that you made with a marker or a torque wrench. Okay, so that wraps it up. Interesting enough, after I torqued this axle down to specs with a torque wrench, I was just right back to where my old marks were anyway. So if you marked your nut in the swing arm and you loosen this about 3/4 of a turn to do your adjustment back here, if you go right back to your marks, you're probably gonna be okay. This is, like I said, this brought me right back to where I was to begin with, even though I used a torque wrench this time. The rear nut, while I had the camera down, I made sure my rear nut was tight against the front one. It was hard to do that while I was holding the camera. So both sides, of course, not letting the front one move because that's my adjustment and I don't want to adjust it anymore. Just holding it in place with an open-end wrench while I use an open-end wrench on this back one and made this back one tight against the front one. And that is it. I went back over and checked the chain. I'm at my 1 3/8 still, my free play, and so I should be good to go for a while. Thanks for watching. Stay safe on the Grom. They're a lot of fun, but they're small, and people have a hard time seeing bikes as it is on the road. And the Grom is pretty quiet and it's small, so you're not the fastest thing out there and you're not the biggest thing out there. So pay attention, ride like you're invisible. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and like, subscribe. See you again.